country's oldest Latino civil rights group came out against it, yet AOC keeps defending it, saying gender is fluid, language is fluid. Yes, and Latino voters are fluid. And then there's abortion, a difficult issue for the Democrats to lose on, but they're trying. For decades, liberals have said if only men could get pregnant, this wouldn't even be an issue. And abortion rights are women's rights. Well, that's wrong now. Or as the kids say, hold up.
Nearly a year has gone by since Bill Maher started his non-stop criticism of the so-called woke movement, and he doesn't seem ready to stop anytime soon. His latest target is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has been traveling across the country like a solo tour promoting her progressive message. However, Maher isn't convinced. As always, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and let's dive in.
A new poll reporting how much Latinos despise the woke term Latinx. It's about as popular with them as a reboot of Speedy Gonzales. Even the country's oldest Latino civil rights group came out against it, yet AOC keeps defending it, saying gender is fluid, language is fluid. Yes, and Latino voters are fluid.
Here's where it all began. Bill Maher did what he's known for, asking the kind of questions many people would rather avoid. This time, he turned his attention to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her strong promotion of a far-left political agenda that, in the view of many Americans, is becoming increasingly unpopular. Maher raised a straightforward question. Why continue advocating for an ideology that a lot of people consider divisive, disconnected from everyday concerns, and even harmful? While some politicians might stop to reconsider or adjust their approach, AOC appears firmly convinced that her perspective is the right one and continues pushing her vision for the country. But Maher didn't stop at simply questioning it. What followed was a sharp and direct critique, one that he delivered with a kind of intensity that's hard to dismiss with quick clips or typical political responses. Stay tuned, because this is where things start heating up.
A difficult issue for the Democrats to lose on, but they're trying. For decades, liberals have said if only men could get pregnant, this wouldn't even be an issue. And abortion rights are women's rights. Well, that's wrong now. Or as the kids say, hold up. When the wokey end of the progressive spectrum talks about abortion now, they shy away from that word women and prefer terms like birthing people or people who menstruate, because somewhere there's a trans man who's pregnant, and I say good for him, and I'll be looking for his story somewhere in a future issue of Ripley's Believe It or Not.
And that became the issue many critics say the debate centered on: defining what a woman is. 10 years ago, it was rarely discussed publicly. Most people treated it as a straightforward biological concept. Over time, however, cultural and political conversations around gender changed. Progressive voices began emphasizing ideas like gender identity and gender fluidity, while critics argued that these views conflicted with traditional biological definitions. For many Americans, the shift created confusion and frustration. People who asked simple questions sometimes felt they were met with criticism or dismissal from political and cultural elites. As the debate intensified, some voters felt increasingly disconnected from the conversation happening in major media and political circles. According to critics of that shift, the political consequences were significant, contributing to major election losses for the Democratic Party. In their view, it wasn't driven by hatred, but by voters feeling tired of being told their concerns or perspectives were unacceptable.
More of them now than ever are identifying as Republican. So are Asian Americans, whose support for Democrats is down 16 points since the last election. A lot of that is because, in the name of achieving equity in schools, Democrats in deep blue cities have made it a mission to eliminate the advanced programs at which Asian kids excel. Asian parents said, okay, I wish all kids well, not a racist, but I need someone who acts like my lawyer.
And that's often what happens when people feel pushed into a corner. They eventually push back, sometimes in unexpected ways. Critics argue that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and members of the Democratic Party appeared especially confident in strongly Democratic states, acting as if their political support there was guaranteed. That confidence, some say, led them to believe their base would support nearly any policy direction they proposed. But according to this view, the response from some voters was different than expected. Instead of staying firmly aligned, a number of people who once supported them became more skeptical or started looking elsewhere politically. In some cases, that meant shifting toward the Republican Party, a notable change given how sharply AOC has criticized Republicans in the past. For observers who see it this way, the shift felt dramatic rather than gradual, with areas long considered reliable Democratic strongholds beginning to show signs of political change. The big question now is whether this represents a temporary setback for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or the beginning of a larger political realignment.
85% Latino congressional district on the border with Mexico, which had always voted heavily Democratic, flipped to the red team. And the campaign manager for the losing Democrat said, "We gave up a reliably Democratic congressional seat for no reason at all. We deserve to know why." Well, aside from your terrible attitude, I'm going to tell you why. Because these voters stopped seeing your candidate as their lawyer.
If you've noticed Bill Maher saying things like, "my lawyer," and "their lawyer," there's no actual courtroom drama involved. It's more of a metaphor. What Bill Maher is really suggesting is that voters want their elected officials to act like advocates for them, people who represent their interests, not someone arguing the other side of the case. This is where critics say the tension begins. Some argue that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her progressive allies sometimes come across as lecturing or pushing policies that don't resonate with parts of the electorate. That perception, according to commentators like Maher, can make some voters wonder whether their concerns are truly being represented. Maher's commentary often builds on that contrast, highlighting what he sees as the gap between what voters expect from their representatives and what they feel they're getting. The irony, as he frames it, is that while AOC frequently speaks about standing up for underrepresented groups, critics argue that the political debate sometimes leaves her appearing as the one defending her position under heavy scrutiny.
And wanted schools to reopen a lot sooner than they did after COVID shutdowns, or think maybe your kid is getting a bad education partly because it's nearly impossible to fire a lousy teacher. Yeah, you're going to say, "Congratulations, teachers, you got yourself a good lawyer. The Democratic Party's always got your back, 100%. But I've noticed my kid is kind of an idiot. So I may be looking for new representation."
It wasn't only Latino voters that critics say were pushed away by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and some of her progressive allies. Education policy has also become a major point of debate. In recent years, discussions around school standards, teacher accountability, and student performance have grown more intense across the country. During the administration of Joe Biden, some education policies backed by progressive groups aimed to strengthen protections for teachers and address broader issues in the school system. Supporters argued these measures were meant to provide stability and fairness for educators. Critics, however, claimed the changes made it more difficult for administrators to deal with underperforming staff and respond quickly to declining results. At the same time, national testing data showed concerning trends. Results from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, often called the nation's report card, reported declines in student performance during the early 2020s, including drops in both math and reading scores among 13-year-olds. The downturn has been widely discussed by policymakers, educators, and parents trying to understand the causes, which many experts link to multiple factors such as pandemic disruptions, learning loss, and broader education challenges. Meanwhile, prominent progressive figures like Bernie Sanders continue advocating for economic and social reforms they believe would strengthen schools and support working families. The ongoing debate reflects a larger political question: whether progressive leadership can help the Democratic National Committee rebuild broader electoral support, or whether critics will use these policy disputes as evidence that the party needs a different direction.
Wants to cancel hundreds of billions of dollars in student debt. Okay, but the poorer 2/3 of American kids who don't get a college degree are going to say, why should the people who didn't go to college and make less money subsidize the people who did go and make more? You want me to chip in so some liberal arts college can build a bigger rock wall? You're not my lawyer. A universal basic income Probably sounds pretty good to a lot of people struggling without a college degree. And a number of cities have been running pilot programs in guaranteed income. But the West Hollywood program had to be suspended because it was unconstitutional. They set up a program where 25 residents were to get $1,000 for 18 months, but only if you identified as LGBT, the rest of that. Why? Because they need money more than any other people? Because no one in West Hollywood will hire a gay person?
Sometimes, when commentators step back and look at policies they believe didn't work as intended, they treat it almost like political satire. Critics of the Democratic Party often point to several high-profile debates from the past few years as examples. One frequently mentioned issue is the "Defund the Police" slogan that appeared in protests and political discussions after the George Floyd protests. Supporters said the idea was about reallocating some police funding to social services and community programs. Critics, however, argued the message was confusing and politically damaging, especially as concerns about crime rose in some cities. Housing policy has also sparked intense arguments. Proposals around rent relief and eviction protections gained attention during the pandemic, including the nationwide eviction moratorium introduced during the administration of Joe Biden. Supporters viewed such measures as necessary emergency protections, while critics said they ignored long-term economic realities. Education debates added another layer. Some school systems reduced or temporarily removed standardized testing requirements during the COVID-19 period, citing disruption to learning and concerns about fairness. Others argued that eliminating testing weakens academic accountability. Political commentators like Bill Maher often frame these issues as examples of Democrats struggling to keep support from moderate voters. Supporters of those policies, on the other hand, argue they were attempts to address complex social problems. The disagreement highlights a larger political struggle over how parties balance activist goals with broader public appeal.
Bernie Sanders said he would legalize marijuana on his first day as president, but that the business of selling pot would be awarded first to those who suffered most from the drug war. And you know what? I can't argue with that instinct. The drug war has been a horrendous instrument of prejudice and punishment for racial minorities. So it seems fair that they jump the line for weed franchises the way Indians did for casinos. But it's also what's holding up Republican support for legalizing weed nationally, which would be good for everybody. And these are the hard, practical choices the Democrats have to weigh. Redress the past, or reach out to the gettable white voter who says, you know what, I'd like a shot at getting in the pot business. But to do that, our entire audience. But to do that, I'm going to need a good lawyer who fights.
Bill Maher makes a pointed argument that cuts through the political noise. In his view, if the Democratic Party wants to regain broader support, relying on social media slogans or moral messaging alone won't be enough. Instead, he argues the party needs to openly acknowledge past missteps and reconnect with voters who feel overlooked. Maher's suggestion is relatively simple. Spend less time talking at people and more time listening to them. Rather than assuming voters' concerns based on polling data or policy papers, he believes politicians should engage directly with communities, hear their frustrations, and rebuild trust through real dialogue. Importantly, Maher frames this not as abandoning principles but as repairing relationships with the electorate. Without that effort, he argues, the party risks speaking mainly to its own supporters while the broader group of voters it needs to win elections drifts away. The question he leaves hanging is whether Democratic leaders will take that advice and adapt, or continue down the same path and hope the political winds change.
Issues. The wavering voter is saying to her lawyer, the Democratic Party, hey, so happy for you that you have so many other clients and that you care so much about their problems and all the pro bono work you do. But you're supposed to be my lawyer. The Democrats need to be like the lawyers you see on billboards. You hurt, we fight.
Bill Maher didn't just make fun of the Democratic Party. He held up a mirror. From ignoring voters' concerns to twisting basic facts, critics say the party has strayed so far that it barely reflects the people it claims to serve. While Maher delivers the humor, he's also pointing out serious shortcomings, policy missteps, communication failures, and a lack of practical judgment. For Democrats hoping to regain trust, blind confidence and echo chamber thinking won't suffice. Observers argue they need to listen, course correct, and reconnect with reality. Otherwise, voters won't just step back, they'll walk away for good. That's a wrap for today's discussion. If you found this insightful, hit like and subscribe for more commentary like this. Thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.